Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Common Ground, where we settle debates on films, TV shows, and games. I'm Aaron Flockton.
And I'm Beth Farn. Welcome to Common Ground.
Today's episode is a cruise special, where we will be discussing Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City.
Umbrella has been experimenting on this town since we were kids. I think they're turning people into weapons. If we don't contain this, Raccoon City will fall. We have to take Umbrella down, or we're not gonna make it through the night.
Shall we go? Oh, shit.
Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, exclusively in cinemas.
So, what did you think about this film?
Overall, it was an attempt.
Yeah, it wasn't great at all.
But if we want to get more specific and talk about the story, I think that was, honestly, there was a lot wrong, but I think that was one of its greatest failures. The attempt to mash the first events of the first game and the second game into one when the first game takes place 2 months prior I think that's where they lost their footing immediately.
Absolutely. I feel like they tried too hard to definitely make it feel more like Resident Evil and just lost control of where they were going with this entirely. It's like you say, with the first game taking place 2 months before the second, and now all of a sudden in the film it's exactly the same day. It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And it's like they bring together all these characters in the story that were never supposed to meet, like Leon meeting the STARS team, and it felt like it was more like they were like, "Ooh, look, these characters are meeting because they've never done that before."
Yeah.
And it didn't need to, because they should have just stayed to their respective stories. They had their own respective stories for a reason.
It definitely felt like a kind of like a love letter to the Resident Evil franchise, but even then, it definitely didn't do a very good job.
Yeah. The main story was basically just lots of muddled crossovers, and every so often you're sitting there going, "Huh, that's not how that works," and every so often you go, "Oh, that's a reference, I get that, that's from this, that's that little detail." And then you go back to going, "Huh, what's going on?"
Yeah, it was definitely a case of like, you could watch through it and it was just like, I don't know what's going on, but I understand these little pieces of information, which is never enough to make a good film.
I think it's probably the first time ever that having prior knowledge, it makes it worse to watch it, because if you don't know anything about Resident Evil, it's just a zombie film pretty much with all these cool cop characters. But when you know about it, you're sitting there for the whole thing, and it's hard not to watch it through the lens. Like, you can sit there and go, I'll try not to watch it that way, but you sit there and you're going, I can't ignore it because it's so wrong. Like,
I think it speaks for itself. When we went to watch this film, there was probably 6 other people in the theater at the time.
Yeah.
And the critical reviews on this film are terrible to speak for itself. So.
Yeah, I just think that I don't understand why they merge it. And the like I say, creating backstories that were never supposed to happen. It became a story, like you said, about Chris and Claire, and everyone else was just a side character, when in reality they are protagonists, of course, but within Resident Evil 1 and 2 they're less of a protagonist. Like, yes, you can play as Chris, but Jill's kind of story takes the lead, whereas she was just kind of put to the side, and it just got very confusing.
Yeah, and the way you mentioned that as well, because with the first game, Chris is hardly in that game until like the very end, and it's integral to the story of that game. So for Chris to now be both in this franchise in the way he is, and now to also be the main character of this film, it makes no sense, especially with the Spencer Mansion incident. The characters are not supposed to know about that, and yet Chris is just here
Yeah.
And
Like I say,
pretty
the
much like the
whole
first thing he says is, what about the Spencer Mansion incident? It has to be connected. It's just, you're not supposed to know about this yet.
yeah, the point is that they go there. Chris gets lost. He's missing for half the game. That's the point, that no one knows where he is when they get inside the mansion. And obviously Wesker's like, let's split up. But obviously, and then at the end you find him again, which is when he reveals, obviously,
Yeah.
that, yeah, I've been put down here by Wesker, which never happens. Like, it just, it's just all muddled.
Baffling,
muddled.
yeah. And then the plot of the second game is kind of just there.
Yeah.
You're in like, the second game takes place in the police department. You probably spend about 3 minutes of the film in the police department.
Yeah, which is a shame because it looks spectacular, but we'll get into that later. But it looked amazing, but we were barely there.
You were barely in it, yeah.
It felt like it was like they were trying to show off all these different locations. Like, look how well we've done in the story, but it just made the story confusing.
It just
because we're moving about for no reason.
And the orphanage again, for example. There is literally only one character in the film that has any right to be in the orphanage, and that's Sherry, who says maybe 2 things in this entire film.
Like, Sherry is integral to Claire's story.
Yeah.
But they remove her, basically, and she just sticks with her dad for the whole thing, when the whole point is that she was never with them. She doesn't know where her parents are, because they're the bad guys, but she doesn't know where they are.
And then her mum and dad in the film as well. We'll get into this in more detail later, but it's a mess from start to finish, really. It's just...
Yeah, they bring in William, and obviously as the main bad guy, but again, you never see him.
You never see him in the game until practically the very end. And like speaking of William and the casting characters, just the casting choices that were made
were very poor.
Were incredibly poor.
I think one of, like I said, the worst decisions that they made was probably for Leon.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
He's a good actor. I have fond memories from my childhood, but as Leon, he was a very poor choice.
Definitely, they took the character of Leon, this like you mentioned, this golden boy cop, and turned him into this dysfunctional, depressed, crippling alcoholic Rocky.
He doesn't become until later.
Until way later in the story.
Because the point is that Leon's challenge is that he comes in on his first day, he's thrown into this mess. He has to overcome all these challenges, meeting characters like Ada, who weren't even in the story when they should have been. But he has to do this all on his own, for the most part, with help, like, say, from Ada and Claire. But in this, he's been there the whole time. They change his story completely, remove all of the challenges to him.
Yeah.
And it makes no sense, because then he becomes unlikable, because he's just not who he's supposed to be at that time. The whole point is that he fits into that narrative because he's new to this. He's learning to become more aggressive, which is what leads into his trauma, which leads to him becoming more aggressive and typically masculine later on in the series.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, he became like a side character in his own story, just so we could have this really nice Chris and Claire, brother and sister, together through everything storyline, which is nice, but makes no sense these, specifically with these 2 characters, because they start off this movie hating each other,
which they never did.
They've always been this tight brother-sister unit.
The whole point of Claire going there is because she lost contact with Chris, and she hadn't heard from him, so she goes there to find him. But
and in the film, it's just
she knows him, and she's like, I ran away.
I ran away and came back. It's like,
because we were orphans who were raised by Umbrella, which never happened.
Another thing that just never happens.
So they create, like, say, to use a rough term, she's a failed girl boss, basically.
Well, more or less, yeah.
They they make her mean. Claire's whole thing is she's nice.
She's really nice.
She's selfless, but by giving her this backstory, this grudge against Umbrella, it makes her less selfless, because it's like, I'm coming here for a personal reason, which I'm not saying she can't have, but the whole point is that she's very selfless. She didn't need a reason. She came here to find Chris. It doesn't make sense
to give it to her, this reason,
She came here to find Chris. She came here for someone else. And then, out of the goodness of her heart, she sees Sherry needing help in all this chaos,
Yeah.
and she helps her. You know, she's like, I'll have to abandon Chris for now. I'll help Sherry. But in the film, she was just mean to everyone. They turned up her sass level, which sure everyone has, but they just turned it up for no reason and just made her really mean and aggressive, like, and take charge when she didn't need to.
Yeah.
Because she already had her own strength. We know that Claire can take charge because she took care of Sherry all on her own. But they just...
I feel like we have to talk about poor characters in this film. The choices they made for Wesker.
Arguably, probably the worst.
The worst character in this film. Wesker, by design, is supposed to be this bumbling, scrawny nerd with sunglasses, leather jacket, and they decided to cast the most ripped, athletic guy who's supposed to be the villain. And then this villain gets replaced by William.
Who, yes, is a villain, you never see him.
Yeah,
so.
He takes this overarching role in this film, and it just makes no sense for it to be him. And this is life's work on this G virus, and for him to just then get shot repeatedly, and that's how he dies.
Yeah, like, again, like, he's supposed to be sly, he's smart. The point is that he is a spy already for Umbrella, but they change it in this, and they make him he's like, oh, I only did it for the money. I don't even know who I'm working for. Like, he's doing it not to be evil like he is. He's just doing it just because apparently he wants to get out the city, which, if he was like Wesker, like he was supposed to be, he could have done that.
Yeah.
But instead, they make him into this nicer, more slightly confused character who, of course, he does abandon the team, but then at the end, trying to redeem him, where he's like, oh, I shouldn't have shot, them, and I feel bad, but he wouldn't. The real Wesker would shoot everyone in that room, including Sherry, this child, and he would have gone. He would have taken the samples and he would have gone.
Yeah, and it's confusing why they didn't just fully go with Wesker as an agent for the Umbrella Corporation anyway, because that's what he is at the end of the day. The whole franchise is setting Wesker up to be this ultimate villain. So to have him potentially have this redeemable moment just breaks down everything about Albert Wesker.
Yeah. The whole point is that he's supposed to be like this pure evil.
Yeah.
And the whole point is that his betrayal is kind of like the reason why Chris, later on evolves into the character that he is. He wants to track him down. He feels betrayed by him. He wants to kill him himself. But he gets no motivation really for this because they're like, well, he betrayed us, but, oh, well, he was slightly redeemable because he felt bad when, no.
Yeah.
So now it's like you've kind of taken away everyone's character motivations now.
Yeah, I mean, he only really becomes the true, if you could call it that, the true Wesker in probably the most predictable post-credit scene ever, where it's revealed that he lives. And I think all 8 of us in the theatre saw that coming at the time. It's like...
Yeah, because we know that he lives. It's not a surprise because he comes back in the 5th game.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, maybe for people who know nothing about the franchise, that would be a huge surprise, and Ada shows up at the end of the film.
When she was supposed to be in the game anyway.
In the game, yeah.
In the film.
But Wesker surviving at the end of the film surprised no one at all.
If you know.
If you know, yeah. But at the end of the day, Wesker was again forced to become another side character for the Chris and Claire story, and
it felt very confused. And again, the teasing of characters, like Mr. X, which all the mutant characters like Mr. X, and obviously William at the end does sort of transform, but he doesn't take his full form.
Yeah.
And they have all these monsters like the Lickers again, but they just don't put in characters like Mr. X. Like say they set up the scenes, but they never put him in. But it kind of leads on to the technical points of this film.
It's like, well, from an editing standpoint, if staying with like the creatures such as Mr. X and the Lickers, personally, I think the creature design was good. Like, it wasn't by any means bad creature design. The
It's
zombies
definitely a step up.
It's a step up, yeah. The zombies probably could have been slightly more zombier. It was kind of just people with rabies at the end of the day.
Yeah, I
It's-
felt like they didn't look undead really at all.
Yeah, it was just like, it was either really fresh infection or they changed what it is entirely.
Which kind of makes another point, you know, like by setting because the infection's already supposed to have taken full, you know, effect by
Yeah.
the time 2 happens. But because they start it immediately there, everyone has to look fresh.
Yeah.
So they're not even really the zombies that you're expecting to see.
Yeah, because it's like you said, 2 months have supposed to have already passed from the mansion incident, so this infection's been around for at least 2 months. But yeah, like you say, all of the zombies look fresh. The only creature in the film that looks somewhat decent is the Licker, and he's in the film for like 2 minutes.
The wrestling match with Lisa Trevor
Yeah.
was bizarre. It just, again, they put so much effort into the design of the Lickers, and the zombies in the mansion look good. But so I just don't understand the point of putting so much effort into the designs if they were never going to be there.
Yeah.
It made no sense.
It's the way it doesn't help the way the film was edited as well. The video game tropes are there. Granted, the emphasis on it being a video game movie was very apparent. You had the iconic shots of like walking into the Spencer mansion. You had the overhead shot,
Which was really cool to see.
it was really cool shot, and then fixed cameras as well. You had
And Rico going up the stairs,
Going up the
but you
stairs,
watch
yeah.
him go.
And you had the shot of the zombie turning to look at
Oh yeah.
Chris. And Rico when they enter the mansion. But the way the whole film as a whole was put together is just poor.
Really.
It's concerning when you are walking into a cinema theatre and the first thing you see on the door is an epilepsy warning.
And then the actual scene that the epilepsy warning is for is awful.
Awful.
It's not
really
even
bad.
well put together. It's pitch black
Yeah.
in the room, and you're just getting these ugly like muzzle shots from the gun, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So you put that in there, a risk for someone, for nothing.
Yeah.
It doesn't even pay off.
It's like, in terms of like that particular scene, if done correctly, it probably could have been a really,
Oh yeah.
really interesting scene. But the fact that the theatre itself is already dark and then the screen
And you just get
was
these bright
heavily
white.
oversaturated with the only thing you could see was the muzzle flash at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
it just
It
burnt
just felt
your eyes for
very
so long afterwards.
very disjointing and not even
Yeah.
in the creative way.
And like all the sequence of events in the film as well, like the helicopter crash, was supposed to happen at the police department, and that just randomly crashes into the mansion.
It's like they were trying to show off all these technical things that they could do by
Yeah.
like, oh, we're gonna have a big helicopter crash through the window. That's gonna look really cool. But then, again, it just fucks with the story and the general experience. So
Yeah.
it's like I can't even marvel at what you're doing here on a technical point because I'm too confused
Yeah.
by the rest of it.
It is very hard to pinpoint what they did well in terms of technicality when you've already lost your audience an
Yeah.
hour ago just trying to piece together the story.
Yeah. But again, also technical things like including you know, little things like you have to shoot the eyes and for the weak points.
Yeah.
But then no one knows to shoot a zombie in the head. It's
Yeah.
like they pick and choose these little technical details from the games.
Yeah.
For
I mean
no reason.
overall the film is just a mess from start to finish.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, it's probably... It's hard to call it the worst Resident Evil film.
Oh, I definitely agree the rest were far worse
Oh,
because at least
yes.
this one attempts to follow.
The rest are far worse. This is probably the best of the worst, if you will. It was enjoyably bad.
Yeah, because at least you had the novelty of the characters. But again, I also say that overall, yeah, it was pretty disappointing. I was optimistically hopeful, but again, like I said, the only thing that didn't offend me in the film, the one good point I thought character-wise, was that you can't really mess up Chris as a character
Yeah,
as the
no.
cliche soldier character. But I mean, like, I also liked it as well that he wasn't like a proper soldier yet, which he isn't.
Yeah.
But again, he was the one who didn't offend me, so I have to say that overall, it was disappointing.
Yeah.
But interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, if you had to give the film a rating out of 10, which is already generous in and of itself, if you had to rate this film out of 10, what would you give it?
Generously, I'd give it honestly just a 3, just because that Chris didn't offend me as my favorite Resident Evil character, and that some of the little details were cool and the little references I liked.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. A solid 3, maybe even a 2 at a push. There was an attempt at the end of the day, and you kind of got to give them credit for at least trying.
I just hope that they can learn from it.
Yeah. Well, that has been Common Grounds, and we will be seeing you in the new year with our next episode.
Merry Christmas.